Okay, welcome to the Vehicle Network and another Friday feature for you. This week, I am delighted to say we've got a guest with us. We have got, and this is being recorded a little bit short notice off the cuff. So I have got Jason Zeitler with me. He's flown in from America yesterday and he's still struggling with a bit of the jet lag. So please be kind to him in the comments. But he's calling through, would you believe, our West Yorkshire village in order to, well, I'll let you explain, but you're here in the UK to see some friends and you've taken time out to come and speak to us about your experiences, but also this product that you've made yourself, which is absolutely commendable, I think, in the current climate, which I'll let you talk about, but the Crash Pulse product that's recently been announced, and we'll cover that off. So thanks for being here, Jason.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. So just give us a little bit of background on yourself then for some of the viewers that won't necessarily have heard of you in our network, but will quickly come to appreciate the contributions you can make in this field.
Absolutely, thank you. My name is Jason Zeitler. I'm an accident reconstructionist. Started doing accident reconstruction back in 2005. Started the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. I was in law enforcement, was there for 10 years, went off to the private sector, Connecticut out in Denver, Colorado. Got to work out there for a little while, left, went to the NTSB, where presently that's my day job, and then I founded a company called Crash Pulse, which is separate from the NTSB. There's no affiliation, but presently during the day, the NTSB, at night, Crash Pulse.
That's great. And just very briefly then, for our, I guess, UK audience, what does the NTSB do, or what's the responsibilities for that organisation over in America?
So the NTSB, we investigate collisions involving different modes of transportation. I'm assigned to the Office of Highway Safety, so we look at and investigate different collisions of large magnitude where there might be a lot of casualties, or there might be a crash involving a particular technology that we want to learn more about. And the goal behind our mission is to improve safety. So we look at these crashes, we investigate, reconstruct with the intention of figuring out what happened, why it happens, and then added advantage is we have the ability to issue recommendations to states, to cities, to companies to mitigate and prevent these types of collisions from ever happening again.
So that's a great cause, and it's something here in the UK that we're slow to adopt, but we are getting there in respect to road investigations. We do have rail investigation and air investigation, and the last time I really spoke to anybody that was getting off the ground, I don't know how far they are nationally with it, but it seems that obviously you've had that in place for quite a long time over in the States with the reports and all the stuff that we see from over here with regards to the findings from some of those investigations are really useful for us to be able to feed into. So I'm sure it's a very enlightening role that you carry out, and it must be quite rewarding to be able to feed back, knowing what you found out can hopefully improve those situations in the future for reducing, mitigating these type of incidents.
Oh, absolutely. So some of the cases that we go to are very tragic, and the end goal is to make sure crashes like those never happen again.
Yeah.
So if we're able to mitigate or even lessen the chance of that happening again, it's very rewarding, and it's something that we take pride in for sure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your technological background then, in regards to getting interested in the company that you've sort of developed and the product that you've born out of developing that. Have you had an interest in the technology side of these investigations more than other aspects, or is there you kind of like spread across them all? What's kind of channeled you into this area?
So this in the spirit of total honesty, this was an accident. Crash Pulse was it kind of a lot of different things happened that led up to this moment. I had a case, I believe it was in 2019, that required a chip swap out in California. And it was a fatal collision involving multiple vehicles and a police agency where I think it was a Toyota Corolla was impacted, caught fire, and it was part of a larger criminal investigation where they needed to recover data from an airbag control module that was burnt up. I didn't know how to recover data at that time, but wound up just purchasing a lot of ACMs and experimenting and figuring out how to do chip swaps. Recovered the data from that module. Now, might seem irrelevant, but later on in 2024, in June 2024, I was speaking at the IPTM Symposium in Orlando, Florida, in the United States, on the topic of chip-level forensics and recovering data from damaged airbag control modules. So I'd gotten my start with chip-level forensics on that case in 2019. Fast forward to 2024, I was lecturing at IPTM about how to use some of these methodologies to recover data. And I remember speaking, and I made just a generic comment like, hey, you do X, Y, and Z, and then take your CAM plus, you plug it into your module, and then recover the data. And I got interrupted from the audience, and someone in the audience says, "Oh, that's a great idea, but they don't make that product anymore." And having lost touch with the reality of sourcing products, being in the government, you kind of lose touch with reality. I didn't think anything of it, and I kind of stopped for a second. I said, "You're joking, right?" And they said, "No, they stopped making that a few months ago." I said, "Well, what's everyone using?" Because at the time they hadn't migrated many vehicles over to the 900 for the United States vehicles. So I go, "Nothing. We use the ones we have, and if we don't have it, we're kind of screwed." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." I didn't know that. So that was June of 2024. That night at dinner, I had dinner with some friends. Actually, my friend that I'm staying at in Newcastle tonight, I was having dinner with him and some of the other California police officers. And, we had a couple drinks, and I said, "Hey, are you guys thinking what I'm thinking?" We were talking about the lecture and other stuff, and they said, "No, we have no idea what you're thinking." And I said, "Okay." I said, "If they don't make this, why don't we just build our own?" And they laughed, and they said, "We don't know how to do that." I said, "I don't either. But it can't be impossible. we could probably figure this out."
Yeah.
And I remember one of my buddies, he goes, "If you figure it out," he goes, I'll finance the whole thing." He didn't, but we still built it. So it's been a year and a few months in the making. Worked on some validation papers that I'm sure we'll get into. And here we are today with a finished product that is thoroughly tested and published on, validated, and is in the hands of a lot of people in America. All great success stories, no issues so far. Everything's going smoothly.
Yeah. So this is, just to delve into the detail a little bit more, for those people that are doing crash investigations, whereby one of the main tools that we use in order to get crash data from is the Bosch CDR tool that's obviously been around in the States for a long time. And in the UK we're kind of adopting it. I remember starting to see that in the sort of 2013 era over here, and slowly we're getting support into this. And anybody that's bought a Bosch kit, say 5 or 10 years ago, would have the CAN Plus device that is the interface between the laptop and the airbag control module or the vehicle, depending on whether or not you're in direct to module. Since then, obviously, we've got a new vehicle interface with the CDR 900, and Bosch are moving that forward. So this is to fill the void of the legacy system for the CAN Plus, which for a lot of our UK audience may, they may not use it that often, but me as a regular user of the Bosch CDR tool, I do find defaulting back onto that sometimes when the 900's not playing ball some days.
Yes.
And as anybody knows in vehicle system forensics, you need two of everything. You need to make sure you're resilient across that. And with that not, it's all right saying, well, we've got enough out there in the field and people will have, one of these devices and be able to get hold of it. sometimes it's not that easy to do that. And as people retire, as people move on, these sort of devices can end up being propping cupboard doors open somewhere. Nobody knows where they are. And this sort of like fills that void. I think that's really important, because what a lot of people tend to overlook with vehicles sometimes is that they're on to the next thing. They're on to the new thing. But I'm always saying this, legacy systems and cars stay around for a considerable amount of time, longer than sort of some of the digital forensic products.
For sure.
Phones, computers, we tend to recycle these a lot quicker than we do our cars. So it does fill that gap. But what really amazes me is how you've kind of taken this to task and just said, well, I'll build my own then, in order to resolve that solution. So just talk us through about your methodologies as to how you tackled this and some of the technologies that you've had to learn yourself in order to build effectively a solution that nobody else has out there.
Absolutely. It was not an easy task, I'll say that. The first few months of it were very challenging, very exciting. So it was different phases of the project. So originally this started as, hey, how do I make this? Or, how do I understand how it works? Because my background, my degree's in biomedical engineering, so it's not exactly an electronics background. I have a heavy download, background, whether we're talking about passenger vehicles or heavy vehicles. So I was fascinated of how can I fix this? So in order to fix this, you have to break a lot of these. Now that's a problem because they were discontinued. And at the time when I decided to, hey, let me try to make this, I only had 2 CAN pluses, and I was thinking, all right, well, if I destroy one, I only have one left, and I destroy that one, and if I'm not successful, what do I do? And this started off with, all right, let's break one. Let's see how it works. Let's see how it goes. And we destroyed one, and I got really nervous because then we needed to destroy another one.
Yep.
And once we figured out kind of how it worked from a hardware standpoint, not a firmware or software standpoint, the next phase of this became, okay, we understand the layout. We understand how the signals, how it's transmitting, how everything's working, but there's a reason they killed this product. Now, I can't speak for Bosch. I have no affiliation with Bosch, but if I remember correctly, there was either a message or an email that went out and said, hey, there's a end of life support on some of these components, some of these chips that are on the board. So what I initially thought this project was, all right, I have to track down all these impossible chips, all these impossible components, and it'll be real easy. We're gonna get them and we're gonna put them on the board and we're done. And then we could bring it to market and the supply issue's over. It wasn't that easy.
No.
So some of these chips are long discontinued. Some are absolutely impossible to find. There's one chip on here that's terribly impossible. I spoke at the EDR Summit a few weeks ago in Houston, Texas, about that one chip and what it was to try to find that chip. There's no data sheet that we could find. There's no data sheet that anyone can find, whether here, China, or Ireland, and so to recreate that chip would be virtually impossible and very expensive. So we had to source it. Wound up dealing with chip brokers and negotiating underground. There's like this whole underground market that you like, a global network, literally.
Yeah.
Where you could, buy, sell, trade, and try to find these ancient chips, and some people will hoard them. In the off chance that one day someone needs it for a project. So let's say that chip used to cost 10 cents. Now, it's hundreds of dollars per chip. So there's a whole underground market with this stuff.
Yeah.
So I spent a considerable amount of time sourcing every chip that is needed for this project, and then we started to build up prototypes. They didn't work. And we built more, and eventually we got it right. So we start off with, hey, how do we understand the hardware? So we had to break some. We had to understand how to source this, source the components. We successfully completed that. How do we build a prototype? That took a while because they didn't work initially. okay, we got that part. But then there's so many different other obstacles that were involved in making this, because there's 2 different chips on this that have firmware.
Okay.
So, to create firmware from scratch is very difficult, because now we have to understand, 1, how the existing firmware work, and 2, how do we make it? Now, one of the firmwares that are on this product is kind of, it's encrypted. So, that's another issue.
Yep.
And you can't exactly start hacking the module and this, that. So there's a lot of research and development that went into this to be able to create something that we could legally produce.
Yes. Yeah.
So when we talk about the 2 different firmwares, there's the main firmware, and then there's the CPLD firmware, which CPLD firmware is essentially like, it's just taking information and sending it here, sending it there, sending it there. It's almost like sorting. The main firmware is what we have to understand to make this product really work as well. The real problem with making this product that was challenging is I can't legally mail this to anyone with Bosch's firmware without their consent.
Yeah.
So I had to come up with my own solution for that, and that took a lot of time, effort, and financial resources. The solution I wound up coming up with, I built a programming team out in Egypt. I had 4 programmers full-time working for months. And we had to create our own bootloader, which is essentially what holds on to the firmware, what accepts the firmware.
Okay.
Because if I just put all the chips on this board and I give it to you and you plug it in, there's no communication between the module or the laptop that you're trying to use.
Yeah.
So we had to get the firmware right. And then you have to get the timing right, and you have to get the bootloader right, and you have to get the CPLD right. So there were so many different challenges beyond the obvious hardware challenge. The real challenge of this project was the firmware and the bootloader and the CPLD firmware. So essentially the solution that I came up with was my own custom bootloader that knows how to successfully communicate with the Bosch CDR software. It knows how to talk to the software. It knows how to talk to the ACMs. But then it also had my own firmware that knew how to be replaced by the CDR firmware, so that when the end user receives this item, receives this product, it not only can communicate with the software, but it possesses the ability to say, hey, you have a genuine license that you purchased from Bosch.
Yep.
And it recognizes that, and it says, okay, if you like, to make this compatible with the software, you can certainly update it legally to Bosch's CDR firmware.
Yep.
And then what happens essentially is my bootloader accepts Bosch's firmware, and then the systems know how to talk to each other properly, and then you can download and do everything. It's a lot of technical stuff.
It sounds very simple, but
I hope I didn't put you all to sleep.
So it doesn't sound simple at all. It sounds very complex in that regard. There's a couple of things that I think are worth eliciting from that. One, don't throw away those items, people, that you think are just worthless. It reminded me of classic cars, in the sense that nobody would pay a lot of money for a classic, what we would term like a classic car these days, but a lot of cars from the 80s in the UK are now popular again, and the amount of money you have to pay for one of those cars now is ridiculous, and it's just happening in the world of chips as well,
Absolutely.
So, if, don't throw away those items, because they could be somebody's after years down the line. But, I think, the real, like you said, the hardware and replacing chips and building the actual, components themselves are fine. But it is that communication and getting technologies to reliably work with laptops and be able to then talk with the software. But not only that, you're having to talk to, one of the largest leaders of the automotive industry components, and many other components as well, on that front as well. And this, it's a real sort of success story, I think, for somebody just to recognize a problem and kind of make something that then works with existing software. And for, I guess, Bosch to recognise that you're contributing to the crash community, and for there not to be any kind of resilience from having this product work with that, because it still offers a solution. And it was, again, it's no disrespect of Bosch. They're a massive company with competing needs as to what they put into their investments. And when somebody decides that's a legacy system and we're not going to make the investment anymore, for somebody in the community to come along and say, well, I'm going to solve that problem and provide the solution, it's testament to you. But I just want to hear of how does the guy that just decides he's going to replace and build a solution for people then engage with Bosch, who are a massive company, to be able to still get that relationship so that the tool isn't redundant, because you still need the software to decode the data.
Sure. So initially, I don't have a formal endorsement from Bosch. Initially, I spoke to them. Let's see, it was last year at the NAPARS conference. Last year it was in California, and they had lectured about, hey, here's the progress and the evolution of the CDR products, software, hardware, and everything. And I had no formal plans on talking to them or saying, hey, I think I have a solution that you guys can benefit from. But they gave such a good presentation, and they were talking about, hey, we wish we can bring that product back, or we wish we had the chips to make that product, and we don't. And at that time, it was early on, and there was a lot of vehicles. I don't think Mazda was I believe Mazda had not been transitioned to the CDR, the CDR 900. And very recently, Nissan and Infiniti just became dual supported. So there was still a lot of vehicles that had not been migrated to the 900. Now, I realize here in the UK and then in Europe, it seems like you guys have a lot of newer vehicles than we have in the United States. We have newer vehicles, and then we have, older vehicles. Yeah. Lots of legacy vehicles. So for us, we have what's Chapter 563. So pretty much around 2013, the federal government came out with requirements saying, hey, if you're going to record any data, you have to at least record these parameters. So it's my understanding, 563 and on will be migrated, or have been migrated to the best of their ability to the CDR 900. Before that, anything that's not presently migrated to the CDR 900 will always be legacy. And that's the understanding I have after hearing their presentation. But how this came about was after they lectured. I had no formal plans on talking to them, but they were talking about, hey, we don't have the chips, they're discontinued, this, that. So right as they finished speaking, I went up to them and I said, hey, hypothetically speaking, if I can get you the chips, would you bring the product back? They said, they looked at me like I was absolutely crazy. And they said, oh, no kid, the chips they're gone. It's over. I said, well, what if I can get you them? And for context, I already had them. Yeah. So I don't have an infinite supply. There are some that are truly, I understand why they had to kill the product, because some of them are truly, truly difficult or impossible to get. Yeah. Well, after a couple of those questions, eventually they said, no, you don't understand. You can't get those chips. And I said, all right, let me rephrase. How many sets of these chips would you like? Yeah. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I kind of just snuck out at that point. I didn't, they didn't know my name. They didn't know who I was. Later that day at lunch, they came and sat next to me and they go, hey, if everyone at the conference, they pulled up a chair and said, do you really have the chips? And I said, yeah, I do. They said, why? I said, well, we can bring the product back. Yeah. They said, well, we're focused on the future. We're focused on the future. We don't have that team anymore. Yeah. Why don't you make your own? And I think it was more of like a joke, I bet you do have the chips, go for it. And I said, well, I don't want any legal problems or anything. I understand some relationships with other, competitors, and I don't consider myself a competitor because, I'm going after a discontinued product that just needed a solution. Yeah. And that was kind of the resulting conversation where it's like, well, why would we go after you if you're just filling a void? Yeah. It almost sounds like you'd be helping us. And I said, okay. And what I didn't say is I had this working prototype with me in my backpack. I just was too nervous to show them. Yeah. Now, it didn't have the logo. It didn't have any of this. It was just literally a black case. I mean, it was this exact one.
Right. Okay.
And then, shortly after that, I had made many of these units, and then the validation process and the the thorough beta testing and the validation process began. I've had conversations with Bosch since, and I was like, hey, are we okay? And they're like, you're not competing. This kind of helps us.
Yeah.
For context, my CDR license is still valid. I've actually recently transferred it to my old consulting firm name to Crash Pulse Technologies. So, I have an active CDR license that says Crash Pulse Technologies. But I've spoke, funny, I got invited to speak at the EDR Summit in March of this year, 2026. And I initially said no. And they're like, why? And I said, well, Bosch is speaking for me, and I don't really know their exact position on this product. And they go, well, let's find out. And they made a phone call, and they emailed me, and they said, hey, they're good with it.
Yeah.
They can't officially endorse it, but it helps them.
Yeah.
So then Bosch spoke at that conference and opened the conference, and I spoke right after that. And
that's cool.
So far we have, a great relationship as far as I'm not impeding, not competing, not in any of their products, and
you're filling a void that still allows their software to be used.
Absolutely.
And otherwise it wouldn't be. So, commercially for them, they're still selling licenses, and you've got a facility for somebody to still be able, for somebody to use that license at some point. But more importantly for me, you might be able to give the family of the deceased answers via this tool that otherwise wouldn't be possible, or would be could take longer if people are having to source out where an old CAN Plus is, and as time goes on, there will be some people who will get answers quicker because of that product that's available.
For sure.
But I think if there's a story to be had with that, it's to engage with the people, speak to them properly about it, and there's always a solution to be had when both people are on the same page around what it's set out to achieve, if that makes sense.
For sure. You can develop products, and you could do it the right way.
Yeah.
And everything is fine. You can coexist. You can do it the wrong way and get sued.
It kind of like crash community and vehicle getting data off cars for serious investigations. It's kind of like, in one regard, it can be a very, very niche area for the automotive industry and what have you. But when you look at, say, the diagnostics market, the aftermarket diagnostics, it's a wash with hundreds and hundreds of different tools out there that will do literally the same thing, completely different. But in crash investigation, we're limited to what we can do, and certainly from our point of view, we just see more and more people wanting to get data off cars in the UK, and I know this is routine for you in the States.
Yes.
But I've no doubt that there's going to be cases in the UK that somebody's going to need a CAN Plus, and they won't have one because either they'll have got rid of it thinking they don't need it anymore, or they just won't know where it is because it's just been passed through departments and ended up being in a cupboard somewhere that nobody can access. But now there is a solution.
For sure.
So, go on.
I was going to say, the chips that are required to make this product, because these are the same chips that were used in the original product, there's a reason why in my opinion, that they had to kill the product. Even I do not have an infinite amount of those chips. So I've been able to make a batch for the United States.
Yep.
I've made a batch for Australia, which I haven't released yet. I made a small batch for Canada, which I haven't released yet. And then I do have a small batch set aside for Europe. There's going to come a point where I also am going to have to kill this product. I do have a reserve, in case someone needs, a warranty claim or something. I do have a reserve for those. But these chips, there's a few that are they're not easy. And then here's one thing I actually forgot to mention about the chips for that story. I sourced what I thought was like the golden pot of, hey, the one impossible chip. I sourced a lot of them, 500. I don't just put them in the modules. I send them off for lab testing to make sure they're genuine and legitimate.
Yep.
And they failed testing and they were counterfeit. So I do have a small supply of the real impossible chip. I'm trying to source more because that will be the limiting factor for this. But we didn't just buy chips and say, hey, throw them on. We're testing. I mean, the QA QC process that I personally put every single module to test is so extensive. And knock on wood, we have not had any issues.
No.
Since the soft launch, since the real launch. Soft launch is in November. Real launch was the day of the EDR summit, so back in March. And everything's been great. But there's going to come a point where, in let's say 5 years, in America, we still have a ton of legacy vehicles that require this, and also Chevrolets. Some Chevrolets, even as recent as this year, I think it's the Chevy Express. I believe it's a 2026, is a CAN Plus only vehicle. Really? So, I got to speak at the EDR Summit, and a couple people came up to me and they said, hey, listen, I have a CAN Plus. And I said, that's great, but God forbid it gets lost in the mail in 3 years, and this product is, I don't have an infinite supply.
No.
What happens in 5 years when yours stops working and I don't offer it anymore because I ran out of chips? Like, it's good to have a backup plan. These cars are still crashing in America all the time. In Australia, same thing, because they have a lot of Holden vehicles. They're crashing all the time. Yeah. Kent Boots just posted on LinkedIn the other day where he has a CAN Plus only Chevrolet that he downloaded. And made a fantastic post about this product. So, just because you have one CAN Plus, and if your whole business is reconstruction, you might need a backup one. If you ever want to open up a business and leave the company you're at, you're going to need one of these eventually. If you want to expand your company, open multiple offices, and that's I think one point that a lot of people in America aren't considering.
No. But So talk us through a little bit about the validation work then that you had to do in order to prove the concept, I guess, and give that feedback to the community to say, listen, this is a product that, all right, I am just a guy that's decided to build a solution and here it is, believe me. But you did do a lot of validation work and made sure that was right, working with the software. Just talk us through that process.
Yes. So an extensive amount of testing went through. We performed a ton of testing when it came first with the beta testing. And once we got the beta testing worked out, because initially, just to give you a super quick 2-second rundown, there's 7 different chapters in the expressive firmware that's on this module. And each chapter does something a little different and communicates with different types of vehicles through different protocols. So one chapter might only communicate with Toyota, Lexus, and Scion. One chapter is Nissan only. One chapter is Dodge and Chrysler. So they all do something a little different. When we first started building out our bootloader, Lexus, Toyota, Scion didn't work. Dodge, Chrysler didn't work. Ford PCMs didn't work, but regular Fords worked. So we had to first go and figure out, well, why isn't it working? How do we fix it? Did we mess something up on the timing? And that was, day one of the prototype. Yep. And I actually flew out to California to a friend's house who has an extensive amount of ACMs, and I just started testing everything, any ACM I can get my hands on. And I said, all right. And I'm actively communicating with my programming team in Egypt that I built, and I'm like, all right, well, we can't get Lexus to work. Let's focus on Lexus. Eventually, we ironed out all the issues, and the only thing that didn't work, actually the very last thing were Ford PCMs that didn't work. I'm like, okay, cool. How do we get a PCM into Egypt? Because their customs is very difficult to deal with, and for whatever reason, you'd swear I was trying to import an illegal narcotic or something.
Just for the benefit of our UK listeners, what is the PCM on a Ford?
Sure, a powertrain control module. So on some of the older Fords, like let's say the older Crown Victorias, the older Explorers, Expeditions, the F-150s, you didn't have the data being recorded by the airbag control module. You had the powertrain control module recording, and it recorded things differently. So that, the airbag control module, you have an accelerometer, you're sensing acceleration, deceleration. It says, forces are great. Let's lock this event. PCM is a little different, where it's actively recording in a loop, and it's always recording. That's good and bad, because if you leave the ignition on, it can record over, and it's just an iterative loop.
Yeah.
So on these cases where you'd have a crash involving an older, let's say an '07 Crown Victoria, you'd have a loop of data, and it was very good data, provided it didn't get erased.
Yeah.
But the only way to recover it is presently still, and it will always be, you need a CAN Plus or a CDX.
Yeah.
And you need Bosch's 221 adapter, which they stopped making, I think, 5 years ago.
Right.
So you need a combination between this product and Bosch's product. Now, initially, when I set forward to make this product, I said, well, no one can get a 221 adapter, which is the adapter you need. Essentially, what happens is with the 221 adapter, when you plug it in, it stops the PCM from overwriting itself.
Okay.
So you plug it in, and normally if you provide power, it overwrites. You plug in the adapter, it stops overwriting, and the data stops, and it's stationary.
Yep.
So when you go to retrieve it, it doesn't overwrite. So what I set forth to just make this product now became, all right, well, how do I make a 221 equivalent adapter? And while I'm at it, why don't I just make an all-in-one kit, which is what I did. So you have the equivalent of the gray adapter, which was the old 387, which is for the direct-to-module. So I have what I call the direct-to-module adapter. You have the equivalent of the 221 adapter, which is the Ford PCM adapter. I call it PCM adapter.
Yeah.
I've made the serial to USB, I think it's Type A cable, which was like the gray cable.
Yeah.
But it's a prolific, so it has like a computer chip in it, which is why you have to put like drivers and stuff on. But during the validation process, my computer is over there. I don't have the old style USB. So as I was doing the validation test, the first round of validation test, I'm like, well, this doesn't fit in my computer. I have to use this converter. No big deal. I quickly realized, big deal, because it kept falling out. So I quickly made, serial to USB-C updated cables. So now you get the old school serial to USB-A, Type A. You get the new USB Type C to serial.
Yeah.
I made the DLC to DB15 cable. I made an extension cord for the adapters, which is just DB15 to DB15. What else? Oh, all 4 DLC adapters also. So like if you have a Toyota, an older Toyota, you can, outside of the United States, you need adapter 4. So I made all 4 of those as well. I feel like I'm missing some parts. I include a chip remover, a chip puller.
Oh yeah.
Because I installed sockets in the chip that holds the firmware.
Okay.
And that becomes important. Actually, let's finish this question. We'll go into that. I guess a whole different subject. So the validation process, after we completed the beta testing was extensive because we had to make sure everything worked. I did not want to release this product and all of a sudden, start to get phone calls like, hey man, I'm out in the field. I have all these, opposing experts here, and I'm the only one that doesn't have equipment that works.
Yeah.
I didn't want that scenario happening. We tested this thing on everything.
Yeah.
Anything we can get our hands on, DLC, direct to the OBD, direct to module. I tested on chip swap modules that I had used on, that I did for cases.
Yeah.
Tested using back powering rigs. You name it. I've tested it. The very last thing that we had to fix were the PCMs. It took us several months to get a PCM into Egypt. We wound up paying off someone. Got the PCM in, fixed the timing issues that we were getting with the PCM, so now we can download PCMs at that point. Finished beta testing, so I thought everything worked, and I remember Kent Boots was helping me with some of the beta testing. Was excellent help, really good guy. And went through, he goes, all right, I'll do one final test of everything, and I was doing tests on my end too. And he goes, all right, PCM works, and then he goes, I have one PCM that failed. I said, you gotta be kidding me. I said, there's no way this is a true story. I said, this is a prank. And he goes, no, I'm serious. And I'm like, which vehicle was it? He goes, it was a 2007 Crown Victoria PCM. I said, impossible. I have the same module. In fact, I have 3 of them. And I plugged mine in, And I'm like, mine downloads. He goes, mine doesn't. I said, what's the difference? And he goes, mine through an RDS flag, which stands for restraint deployment signal.
Okay.
So it's super rare. In my entire 21 years in accident reconstruction, I don't think I've ever seen it in the field.
Oh, okay.
But once in a while, you'll get an RDS flag, and that apparently changes the timing of the data that's being transmitted.
Right.
So while the PCMs worked, they worked provided there was no RDS flag being issued. So then I had to change the timing of, the communication protocol, so that not only did it work with PCMs, but it worked with PCMs that also had an RDS flag. Once we completed that, we went through all the testing again.
Yep.
Everything worked. Then we went into validation. So there's 2 validations that were conducted. The first one was for SAE. So I have an SAE paper that I submitted very early on of last year. It was like April of last year. For whatever reason, it took forever to kind of progress through the system. It essentially went from one department to the other department. I submitted it as a technical paper because it's validation. So they said, this is great. We don't have an editor. We're going to send it over to like the Traffic Safety Division Journal. I believe that's their name. They held on to it for a couple months, and they said, hey, this is a great paper. This is a needed paper, but this should be a technical paper. Why don't you give it to them? I was like, they sent it to you. Like, this is a joke, right?
Yeah.
Like, and they go, all right, well, we'll expedite it. And I'm like, okay. I won't hold my breath. So they sent it back to technical paper, or technical events, or technical paper, I should say. And it kind of sat for a little bit. And I'm emailing because I'm like, hey, let's go. And we do the first round of the first round of peer review, and some very good questions and good comments were provided. And I said, okay, I addressed every single one. I didn't want to go through multiple rounds of peer review. So anything they suggested, whether I felt it was excellent or stupid, like I addressed, except for one. They said, hey, why don't you talk about the future of crash data retrieval? And I said, guys, this is a legacy product. We're not talking about the future. We're talking the past.
Back to the future.
Yeah. Like, and then from that, I came up with like a little slogan where it's like, understanding the past, engineering the future, or something like that. I think that's like the catchphrase on my LinkedIn page. So there's a Crash Pulse Technologies LinkedIn page if you guys want to follow it. So we did one round of peer review. The paper was accepted for publication. It had a target date of February 3rd. It wound up being published at the end of February, closer to March. And there's an active SAE validation paper out where I downloaded a series of vehicles, compared the data against the CAM Plus data, and showed everything that should matches identically. Now there's some characters that we expect, like ignition cycle count. If I unplug and I plug in a different unit, we're going to increment. So that's expected. If there's any user entered comments, that's expected to change. The date and time of the download, obviously. And then the associated hexadecimal data to those fields are expected to change. But every single thing across every OEM, across every vehicle was perfect. It was identical. And so that paper was published. In that paper, I also address modules that have undergone chip swaps, have been back powered, through a repower rig, DLC, direct to module, you name it. While I was still waiting for that paper to be published, so that was published towards the end of February of 2026. In January, I was in Maine on a call out, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to write a second paper, do more. I had done additional testing that I didn't include in the SAE because I submitted the SAE paper so early on. When it came time, it's from that point on, I had done so many more vehicle testing. So I had all this data that I was sitting with, and I'm like, all right, well, I have enough for a second paper. So I wrote and submitted in January of 2026 a second paper to ARJ, Accident Reconstruction Journal. So that was, let's see, I think mid-January of 2026. They were trying to get it published in 2 weeks. It didn't happen. They had the target date of April 1st. And I got an email like a week before April 1st, and they said, hey, great paper, good feedback. We were going to publish it for April 1st. We're bumping it to June 1st because we want to put a chip swap case that I did that they pulled from the NTSB docket.
Right.
And they said, all right, we're going to put this chip swap paper in April 1st, and then your CDX second validation paper has a new target date of June 1st. So we're not super far out. So
No.
we have the SAE papers out already.
Yep.
The AirJ paper should be out June 1st.
Yeah.
And then we'll have 2 validation papers. I have gotten phone calls where people are like, hey, do you want me to do a 3rd paper or this, that? Whatever you guys want. Like.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's always good to, you can never have enough, people checking these things. I think what's interesting out of those comments is you will always find these outliers, won't you, that you can't really account for, and those flags that you spoke about, how are you expected to come across that issue with the automotive industry as it is, with all these different modules, communication processors, different data types, different data sets, different data meanings. It's very difficult to bulletproof yourself across everything, but I think you've done a pretty robust job, and there will be some common modules, I guess, and common vehicles that you see that you're going to encounter maybe more than others.
Yeah, so to really bulletproof this product, when I spoke about the firmware earlier, there's 7 chapters of the firmware. Only 6 of them deal with vehicle communications in the sense of downloading data.
Yeah.
The other one's just general communications and VIN retrieval.
Yeah.
So essentially, if you're able to test a series of vehicles from each chapter, so for instance, chapter 7 is Honda, Acura, and Mazda. 5 was Nissan. So like, if you start attacking each one of those, you quickly see, okay, all these work or all these don't work. And then, if you're testing several different vehicles, from each different chapter, you can quickly see, all right, this works, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, we've tested even rollover sensors, you name it, we've tested it. And luckily I did get some help in that area. And, with people that had extensive libraries of airbag control modules, rollover sensors, PCMs. I personally bought, I think it was between 15 and 20 PCMs. I was just trying to look for RDS flags.
Yeah.
And, I don't know what the statistical probability of this was, but every single PCM that I bought, so 15 to 20 of them, and I already had a couple to begin with, every single one did not have an RDS flag. And I'm like, all right, I just spent like $1,000 on all these PCMs. And then, I called a friend and I said, do you have any with a RDS flag? Yeah, I have one. I was like, can I borrow it? Yeah, no problem. He sent it. He goes, you know who has one? Call so-and-so from Orange County Sheriff's Office. So I said, okay. So I called him. I said, do you have a PCM with an RDS? I have 2. I said, how? I just bought 15 or 20 of these things. I can't find it. He also lent me both of them. He actually he gave me one. We exchanged. I gave him
one without.
Yeah. And I said, can I work out a deal? And he's like, just keep one and send me a different one. And I was like, all right. He goes, I don't even have a PCM adapter. I said, I'll give you one for free. He goes, can you make me a cable for like a 222 cable? I said, absolutely. And really, really good people, and got so much support. And once when it's early on and you're developing the product, everyone thinks you're crazy, and you get no support, no financial support, no regular support.
And that is a big side to it, developing a product and the expense of that, but just buying all those modules and things like that, the cost that people don't necessarily see to prove the concept. And I know from my experience of dealing with infotainment systems, I've bought screens, and I've bought another screen because that one, it's the same screen, but it's a different part number. And until you get into it, you don't realise how expensive it can be just to do R&D on modules and vehicle behaviour. So that on top of developing the product as well, it can't be easy from from a entrepreneurial type, kind of thing when you're doing this for the first time as well, and you've got a day job to do as well with regards to the commitment that you've got in your current role as well. So I think it's commendable that you've come out with a product that will really help the crash community.
Oh, thank you.
I guess is this the end then? Was this just a hobby, or do we see other opportunities without giving too much away as regards any future considerations around this scene? Is it giving you the appetite to challenge yourself in other areas, or is it? Oh no, I'll tell you what.
This.
I'll just I'll leave that world alone for a bit now and and rustle off into somewhere else.
Absolutely. Yeah. This started purely as I'm making just this.
Yeah.
No cables, no adapters, no anything else.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I was saying earlier, it quickly became, okay, well, the end user's going to have to source all these products, you know, the PCM adapters long discontinued.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what, I'll make all the adapters, I'll make all the cables. And then all of a sudden, you know, you accidentally build a company. You know, it was like, it was kind of an accident, you know, and then it's like, all right, well, the evolution of this, I started doing chip swaps in 2019, you know, I started lecturing about well, actually I published in 2020, I think it was published in 2021 actually, lectured in 2021 about it, lectured in 2022, lectured in 2024, and then all of a sudden, you know, someone screams out, hey, they don't make those anymore, and then you say, oh, I'll build it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy to see the evolution of some of these things. And this, I intended to be a standalone product. I didn't want to make cables. Didn't intend to make cables. Then I made cables. You know. Then I made adapters.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden you start saying, you know what? This was. What's the best way to describe it? This was a very fun project until the firmware portion. I didn't care for the firmware. That was a lot of headaches, a lot of work, a lot of time. A lot of money. That was the most expensive part of this project, and you push through it because what's the alternative? You know, like you've made it this far, and then you know, okay, I can illegally distribute this with Bosch's firmware. I don't want to get sued. You know,
no.
So you push through and you make it to the other side, and then all of a sudden, you know, people are saying, hey, what are you building next? It's like. You know, okay, well, let me sell a few of these so I can make back my money, you know, and then reinvest it. And, you know, what starts to happen is, you know, we're in such a tight-knit community. Yeah. And everyone's friends with each other, everyone talks, and it's such a good community in that regards. So all of a sudden people are saying, you know, hey, I need this, or can you make this? So what I've been asked to create, and I'm not creating all these, but the number one thing I've been asked to create are like discontinued direct to module cables, which I have no intentions of making. No. Mainly due to the cost. Like to make molds for them are in excess of, you know, $10,000 per cable, and you know there's a lot of cables, so I have no formal plans on doing that. I've been asked to make the ACK adapter, which was used for like Chrysler products, just in a limited time frame. I think it was like around 2011. I'm not making that product. No. You know, I don't know anyone that's actually used that product. Now I have during validation. During beta testing validation. So yes, it does work with, you know, the ACK works with the FlexRay, works with everything. So those are not going to happen. As far as what is likely the future, I do have some smaller things that I'll be releasing over the next few months. You know, as far as, you know, maybe to do with repowering rig, I'm working with a gentleman in California. Yeah. You know, we're set to release that, just kind of an update on the repowering rig. There's like a power adapter that we're working on. I don't want to go away too many details.
No. Well, you've got clearly things and plans to keep kind of like going with the afterlife of what you've done. Yeah, I've got some smaller things. Yeah. And then I've got some larger things. They're truly original. Like this product was needed, at least in America. You know, people were literally breaking into each other's cars and stealing these things. So the need for it was there. The demand for it was present. Funny story. One of my friends that wanted to help with this product, and he didn't. But he was on Cops. You might know him. He has the number one episode of Cops, where he's chasing the little guy down the Las Vegas Boulevard. You know, he called me. He goes, Jay. He goes, you know, his name's Evan Rosenthal. He goes, Jay. He goes, why does anyone need this product? Now he doesn't do crashes. He doesn't investigate crashes. He's an entrepreneur. Yeah. You know. He goes, why does anyone need this? I said, Evan, I'll tell you what. I'll make you a deal. You have 24 hours starting now to find me one CAN Plus back, you know, this is probably late 2024. Yeah. I said, you have 24 hours to find me one CAN Plus anywhere in the world for sale. It has to be actively for sale, and you have to buy it no matter what the price is. It could be $12,000, it could be more. I don't care what the price is. And if you can find me one CAN Plus for sale in the whole world, and buy it, Yep.
I'll reimburse you for the product, and I'll give you $10,000. You have 24 hours. There's no catch. And I'll put it in writing.
Yeah.
He goes, okay. 24 hours later, he calls me. He goes, Jay, you weren't lying. Not a single one. He goes, not a single one. So I said, that's why I'm making this product.
Yeah.
But as far as future products, I want to not just remake old products. I want to create products that will help out our community that aren't currently made. So if you go to the website crashpulse.com, you'll see a section of, hey, do you have an innovative idea? Do you want to collaborate? So presently, I'm working on some products with some top-notch, engineers and reconstructionists. Presently in America, but I'd be happy to work with anyone, around the world. Working on some absolutely amazing products that are original. So we have some of the smaller products I was saying about before, and then we have a whole line of things that we're working on that are original. That I don't want to jinx it, but I don't know anyone that are currently working towards fixing it or creating
solutions to problems.
So there's some really exciting big products that we're working on, and I'm confident we'll have them done sometime this year. And then we'll just keep releasing them. We'll start with one OEM, we'll do another OEM and another OEM, and just anything that makes sense we'll do. If you have an innovative idea, whether it's a cable or an adapter or a full product, I'd be happy to work with you on it, develop it out.
But it needs a community to feed. It's great to have somebody that is open to taking the ideas and taking people's problems and turning them into solutions, because a lot of these people are reconstructionists. They're busy, they're engaged with this, and maybe one, they don't have the time, two, they don't have the knowledge, three, they don't have the infrastructure that obviously you have now got that experience from developing this product. And to have that two-way conversation and somebody that is from the community as well, it's a real sort of great area that you're in, and it's a great asset to the community for having somebody that's willing to take on the challenge of building, CAM Plus and CDX with the technology. So that if you do need something, then this guy is worth reaching out to have a conversation with, because he no doubt can solve the problems that you're currently facing, and the community will be grateful for that as we go forward, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I'd love for the future of Crash Pulse to be collaborating with, everyone in the industry. So even if it's just an idea, concept, or you're like, hey, everyone needs this, even if it's literally just an idea, or maybe you have a prototype, reach out. I'd love to work with everyone, across the whole world. We're introducing this product to Australia in a few weeks, and
cool.
Got some inquiries from Canada last week. I haven't even opened it up outside of America yet, and I started getting phone calls like, hey, we're in Canada, we need it. Can you make an exception? I said, absolutely. So let's see, after I return home from the UK, we have the IPTM symposium in a week and a half, 2 weeks. I'll be speaking there on chip swaps, not for the product. Once we finish that conference, I'll open up the market to Australia and Canada. And, while I'm actively working on this.
So these are the only ones in the UK at the moment then?
This is the only one in the UK. That's
very good.
One.
And you will you will tell us a little bit about the labeling. You will personalize these for people. So
every single one's built to order.
Built to order and personalized as well, which is great. But again, as a solution to get data from a black box, it is a black box.
It's a black box. And it's funny because before the logo was on there, it was truly just a black box. And so when I had the prototype and I showed it just to a handful of people at the NAPARS conference last year in California. I showed it to Lupac, I showed it to Kent Boots, and then some of the Delta V guys. And it was funny, some of the reactions were like, wow, it's literally a black box. They're like, good job.
Good job.
So I got some really good feedback. I only showed it to a few people, and they're like, this is amazing. The number one question I did get, though, was, does it make the clicking noises when it downloads? And I said, yes, it's the same components. It has the relays that make the clicking noises.
You should have got some sort of musical tune kicking out of there as well.
That would have been great.
Maybe next time.
Some people are like, why didn't you redesign it and use all new components? I said, you need the clicking noises.
Yeah,
and
you do need that
you have to
clicking
have
noise.
it. I wanted this to be, look and feel as close to the original. I didn't want people to say, "Hey, this is a foreign product to me." I
Yeah.
want them to pick it up. It literally
Yeah.
has your DB15. It has your serial.
Yeah.
It's got my color LED, and
Yeah.
then it's got my bootloader. But I wanted people to pick it up and just say, you know what, like, wow, this is truly like a solution.
Solution
that
to the
feels
problem we need.
feels familiar.
Yeah.
you know.
Well, Jason, thank you for calling by, passing through
thank
West
you.
Yorkshire and spending some time with us and taking time to chat. It's been a really enlightening chat, and I'm sure if there's anybody in the UK market that's after one of these, we can facilitate getting these into the hands of people that need them.
Absolutely.
And how can people reach you if they want to connect with you then? Are you on any of the social platforms or?
Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn, Jason Zeitler. I have Crash Pulse Technologies on LinkedIn also. So, give
him a follow.
Yeah, that'd be great. Give a follow. Crashpulse.com is the main webpage.
Yeah.
The storefront for US is crashpulseus.com, but it's all linked in just regular crashpulse.com. The crashpulseglobal.com, which will be for Europe, UK, Australia, and likely Canada also. That I will launch probably at the end of the month.
Okay.
But if anyone needs anything, email address jason@crashpulse.com. You can use admin@crashpulse.com. And feel free if you have an idea for a product or you just have a question or anything, or maybe you want something to come to market that no one's making it. And I'll be happy to make anything work with anyone, create some cool stuff. And I didn't want to just make a solution. I wanted to make a solution that was personalized, that was fun, and look cool. I was kind of tired of getting products in just a brown box and saying like, oh, cool. I can, this is
well,
nice
you've
to produce.
certainly ticked the box there, and thank you very much for our personalised.
Oh, absolutely.
Personalised one here. Great stuff. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Jason. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.